Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Richard Hasen, who's a Chancellor's Professor of Law and Political Science at the University of California, Irvine. He is a nationally recognized expert on election law and campaign finance regulation, and is co-author of the leading casebook on election law. He served as founding co-editor of the quarterly peer-reviewed publication Election Law Journal, and he's the author of more than 80 articles on election law issues published in numerous journals, including the Harvard Law Review, Stanford Law Review, and Supreme Court Review. And he's the author of The Voting Wars from Florida 2000 to the Next Meltdown. And his latest book is Election Meltdown, Dirty Tricks, Distrust, and the Threat to American Democracy. And he has an article at Slate, I've never been more worried about American democracy than I am right now. The preemptive attack on the vote count is a 5-alarm fire. Welcome to Background Briefing, Richard Hasen.
Good to be back with you.
Well, thank you. In terms of a 5-alarm fire, we have the arsonist and the fire brigade in Donald Trump. He's lighting the fire. He's saying it all out there and up front to the world, that essentially what he's saying is that Democratic votes equal fraud, when he talks about mail-in ballots and the need for the Supreme Court to step in and toss out the mail-in ballots. At least that's how I see it. How do you see it?
I think the comments of the president are really worrisome. And it's not just the president. It's the Attorney General of the United States making unsubstantiated claims of voter fraud. I think it's a 5-alarm fire because if the election is close, between the litigation and the kinds of statements that the president's making, we're in some real trouble in terms of the ability of voters to coalesce behind a legitimate winner in the election. If the election is not particularly close, I think this issue is going to go away. But it really seems that Trump is making some dangerous kinds of statements that undermine the very premise of democracy, that we hold a fair election and that the losers accept the results as legitimate and agree to fight another day.
And what could be more dangerous than Trump's refusal to agree to a peaceful transition of power?
Well, his comments were somewhat garbled, as is common with him. Maybe he doesn't even understand what the terms peaceful transition of power means, if we gave him the benefit of the doubt. But surely some of his supporters understand it. And I think it's an invitation for people to reject election results as illegitimate unless Trump wins. I mean, Trump himself has said, if I don't win, the election is rigged, which is just one of the most anti-democratic things I can think of a leader in a democratic country saying.
Well, in 2016, when he won, he said the elections were rigged and still insisted that the 3 million votes that he lost by were invisible Mexicans and others voting. So there is no consistency there, I guess.
Well, it's remarkable that the winner of the election is casting doubt on it. He also, the stuff that he says is just so outlandish. In that 2016 election, he told ABC's David Muir that there were 3 to 5 million fraudulent votes cast by non-citizens, no evidence of even 300 such votes. But he said all of those votes went to his opponent. Just speaking completely without any basis in fact, and yet many of his supporters will believe the kinds of statements that he's making.
But isn't the bottom line, he's saying, I decide who the next president of the United States is, not the American people?
Well, I think the key here is that the president doesn't get to decide who wins the election. We have a decentralized election system, and it has many problems. But one benefit is that you don't have an election body that's under the control of the president who can declare what the vote totals are. And so I think, say it's a Biden trouncing or for that matter, a Trump trouncing, and all of the outside experts who examine vote totals agree that one side or the other has won. Then I think regardless of what Trump says, I think that the election's over and we move on, and he may be resistant to leaving, but I don't know exactly how that plays out, but I don't think it creates an impediment. Where things get really scary for me, and what I try to lay out in that Slate article, is that if the election is very close, then it's possible to try to use litigation and ramped up claims of fraud and chaos in the election to try to claim that someone other than the voters should be the ones deciding, whether that is state legislatures or the Supreme Court or Republicans in Congress. And that's where things can get murky and scary.
So let's talk about that scenario, which is often referred to as the red mirage followed by the blue shift. In other words, since the preponderance of Republicans will vote in person and the preponderance of Democrats will vote by mail, the expectation in this scenario is that on election night, Trump may appear to be ahead in the red mirage, but then as the Democratic votes come in, the Democrats then take the lead. And Barton Gellman in the Atlantic has laid out a scenario of how the election will be stolen in plain sight by Republican legislatures in key swing states, assigning Trump electors to the Electoral College regardless of the popular vote. Does that bother you, that scenario?
Well, I think it's a very low risk probability that this happens, but it's not a non-existent risk. And that's because we have a fundamentally undemocratic set of rules that apply in our Constitution. The Constitution, many of your listeners might be surprised to learn, does not guarantee voters the right to vote for president. Instead, not only do we use the Electoral College, which itself is anti-majoritarian because it doesn't treat all voters equally, but the Constitution says that it's the state legislatures that get to set the manner for elections, and it's only by their grace that we get to have the ability to vote directly for president. I mean, that needs to change. The kinds of machinations that it would take for a legislature to try to take the votes away from the people, I think would cause widespread social unrest, would be potentially unsuccessful, and would potentially be self-defeating in that it would call the very election of these legislators into question and make them, I think, extremely unpopular among many voters. So I don't think it's likely, even though Gellman was able to get some Republican operatives and a Republican Pennsylvania operative on the record saying that they're looking into this potential possibility.
So the Supreme Court apparently in Bush v. Gore made this scenario possible along with the Constitution itself. Can you tell our audience about why that is the case?
Yeah, it gets a little bit into the weeds, but basically what Article 2 of the United States Constitution says is that each state legislature gets to set the manner for choosing presidential electors. That's been the rule since the beginning. And in the Bush versus Gore case, which was the case that resolved the disputed 2000 election between Bush and Gore, the Supreme Court said that state legislatures continue to have this power. There's no direct right to vote for president. And even though every state has given voters the right to choose the president, that right can be taken away by the state legislatures if the legislature wants to do so. Now, voting has already started in many places, and I think it would be too late for the state legislature to change the manner of conducting the election. I think the play would be somewhat more convoluted, as I lay out in the Slate piece. The play would be that the election is so uncertain in its results, and there's so much fraud or chaos or problems with how the election is run that we don't know what the will of the voters is, and so we just have to choose our electors directly ourselves, and then send a slate of electoral college votes to Congress to be counted. It leads to a whole bunch of messy scenarios involving the power of the legislature versus the governor, competing electoral college slates going to Congress, Congress dividing over how they count the votes. I mean, there's all kinds of things you can play out, lots of nightmare scenarios, all of it very unlikely. But again, all of it possible because of how our electoral system's indirect method of electing the president is constructed.
So the president is obviously talking to some of the candidates he has, but it does seem, for the Supreme Court, it does seem that Amy Coney Barrett is the front runner here. And given what he's just said, that he needs 9 people on the Supreme Court to essentially throw out these mail-in ballots because they're all fraudulent, does that mean he's sitting down with Amy Coney Barrett and just basically telling her how to vote?
I certainly don't think so. I mean, you can never put anything past Trump, and Who knows what he's saying behind closed doors? But I don't see why he would do that, because you know that assuming that there are confirmation hearings, one of the questions that's going to be asked of her is, have you had any communications with the president or anyone else about the upcoming election? I also think she'll be asked, if she is confirmed, would she be willing to recuse herself in the election? But whether she does that or not, the death of Justice Ginsburg means that we have essentially a 5-3 court, conservatives versus liberals. And the court has been dividing on voting issues along conservative liberal lines for many years. There's no reason to think that an additional justice would make the difference in that sense. If you are the new justice put on the court, and 2 weeks later you're choosing the president who just chose you, it puts that justice in a very difficult position. I mean, I think that these justices have very different ideological views, but I think down to the one, they are not motivated by how can I help my president or my candidate stay in office. I think they're motivated ideologically, but of course, there's motivated reasoning, which explains in Bush versus Gore why you had the conservatives on the court embracing the kind of equal protection theory that liberals usually like, and liberals rejecting it. In the context of a hot disputed presidential election, I think we can expect, whether or not there's a ninth justice on the court is most likely to divide along party lines.
But in terms of a hearing, which I assume that there will be a hearing, albeit pretty truncated, do you think that the Democrats are going to be able to stop this train, this freight train that's barreling ahead at warp speed? Because the chairman, or at least the minority leader of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Dianne Feinstein, she kind of bungled the last time with Kavanaugh, with Christine Blasey Ford. She's not exactly the sharpest tool in the toolbox at this point, I'm afraid to say.
Well, I think we want to differentiate between two things. One is, are Republicans going to be able to get a vote on a Supreme Court nominee if they want to? And the answer is simply, with the filibuster gone as to judicial nominees, yes, if they want to push it to a vote, whether there's a full hearing or not, they'll be able to get a vote. And with Romney and other Republicans lining up in favor of an early vote, that seems pretty likely. But the other question is, how much political cost will Republicans pay for doing this? And I think that depends upon the strength of the Democrats and their ability to bring out the kinds of issues that would be relevant for the American people to hear, especially in the period before the election. And whether Feinstein is up to that task, I have similar questions as you do. I certainly think that the way the Kavanaugh hearing was handled could have been improved. And I don't think that Feinstein's earlier statements about the filibuster indicate that she seems to be in a different era and doesn't seem to be recognizing the kind of hardball that is being played by Republicans in Congress.
Well, Richard Hasen, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
It's been great to be with you.
Well, thank you. And again, I've been speaking with Richard Hasen, the Chancellor's Professor of Law and Political Science at the University of California, Irvine. He's a nationally recognized expert on election law and campaign finance regulation, and is the co-author of a leading casebook on election law and the author of The Voting Wars from Florida 2000 to the Next Meltdown. And his latest book is Election Meltdown, Dirty Tricks, Distrust, and the Threat to American Democracy. And he has an article at Slate, I've never been more worried about American democracy than I am right now. The preemptive attack on the vote count is a 5-alarm fire. This has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters. I'd like to thank producer Graham Fitzgibbon. This program is available at backgroundbriefing.org, where you can sign up for email updates as well as subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like this program, you can help us reach more listeners by taking a moment to rate and review us on iTunes, Google Play, and wherever you get your podcasts. And please do share today's program with friends, family, and colleagues on Twitter and Facebook. To help us sustain our mission, spread the word, and keep us corporate free, we have added a donate button. So if you are in a position to give support, please take a moment and visit backgroundbriefing.org/donate, where your tax-deductible contributions will help us continue to build a reality-based community in post-truth America. And I'll be back again tomorrow with another Background Briefing. Bye for now.
Lady dressed in white. the man should love.